Sa loob po ng 2 minuto, mag-start na po tayo. Depedangiles po. Ready na po ba yung Depedangiles para sa ating MOL ngayong umaga nito? Ayan, good morning po ulit. Tinatawagan na po ang DepEd Angeles City para pangunahan po ang ating MOL. Maaari na po tayo mag-start.
Post siya kami.
Ready na po ba? DepEd Angeles City pa.
Bagay, alas 9 pa lang. Parang tutulog pa kayo.
DepEd Angeles po.
Everything you know is in your mind.
Okay, remind ko lang po, mamaya yung in charge po sa MOL po, mamaya sa hapon, ay ang DepEd Mabalacat po. DepEd Mabalacat City. Thank you. At ngayon, para po pasimulan ang ating pangpitong session, let me introduce to you our speaker for this day. Our speaker for this day, he finished his Bachelor's of Arts major degrees at Our Lady of Angels Seminary, Quezon City. Served as college campus minister of Miriam for 3 years and theology department chairpersons for 6 years. Academic coordinator, philosophy and theology for 3 years. Textbook author, grade 12 UMS, more than 20 years of teaching theology, philosophy, and social sciences subjects. Facilitator of resource person in different workshops and seminars. is currently the head director of Miriam Identity, Spirituality, and Mission Office, and the treasurer of the APNIB Philippines. Ladies and gentlemen, ang ating pong speaker ngayong umagang ito, walang iba po kundi si Sir Renato Ato de la Cruz. Morning, sir.
Good morning, everyone. Gandang umaga po sa lahat. Naririnig niyo ba ako?
Yes po, sir.
Sige,
Yes po,
share
sir.
ko
Good
lang yung
morning
screen
po.
ko, Sir Floyd. Good morning po.
Tama, sir.
Nakashare na po ba? Okay na, Sir Floyd? Nakashare na ba?
Yes po, sir. Yes po.
Okay, so once again, good morning to everyone. So it's a pleasure to be here, to be virtually present in your webinar, in your series of webinars, or in your training. So I'd like to express my sincerest gratitude to Sir Floyd for inviting me to be one of your speakers for the second batch. Again, I also had my talk last week for the first batch, I think. So it's both a pleasure and a pressure. I mentioned this the last time that today's seminar is both a pleasure and a pressure for me. It's a pleasure simply because talking about a very important topic is very encouraging on my part because, again, this is, I think, one of the areas that we really have to pay attention to. It's a pressure because I don't know really if you will be listening throughout my sharing, but I just hope that you are truly attentive to what I'm going to share this morning. So the topic actually can be a very good topic when we speak of research. So for those who are interested in research, for those who are writing their thesis or maybe dissertation, this can be very academic. Psycho-spiritual development and dynamics of intra and interpersonal relations. But of course, I do not consider myself an expert nor a scholar. So I'd like to maybe tackle the topic in the light of, or in the context of your training, in the context of values, education, or maybe more importantly, in the context of our being values educators. So the psycho-spiritual development and dynamics of intra and interpersonal relations. I will not be going to define terms here. I presume that you are already familiar with the terms, okay? But of course, in the light of maybe deepening our understanding of this topic, I'll be giving some examples later on. But before we dwell further, I think from the title alone, we can infer some presuppositions, meaning we can deduce, we can conclude some presuppositions based on the title alone. So, for example, these are just some 3 basic presuppositions that I have, and I use this to guide me in my presentation this morning. Maybe this serves as an outline of what I'm going to share to you this morning. So first, that education takes into account psycho-spiritual development. So that's one area that I'll be going to tackle in my sharing this morning. And the second presupposition is this, that psycho-spiritual wellness is a key to a healthy intrapersonal and interpersonal relationship. Meaning to say that no healthy intrapersonal and interpersonal relationship can happen without psycho-spiritual wellness. And then, of course, the last presupposition that psychological well-being is connected with spirituality. So I just hope that with these 3 presuppositions, I'll be giving justice to the topic. Okay? But as I've said before, we dive in further to these basic presuppositions, maybe allow me first to reorient you once again to the fundamental motivations why we are attending this webinar. So we ask ourselves, bakit nga ba tayo nandito? Is it because we were required? Is it because of the points? Is it because of the certificate? So we must have that self-introspection, intrapersonal. We ask ourselves, why are we here? But I believe whatever your reasons are, they are personal. Okay? But of course, I'd like you also to know and maybe remind and review some of the fundamental motivations or reasons. And this one would be the first legal reason. So you talk about your personal reasons, but let's also talk about our legal reasons. So the Philippine Constitution states that educational institutions shall strengthen ethical and spiritual values, develop moral character, and personal discipline. So the supreme law of the land speaks of the need to strengthen. And as values educators, we are here. So trainings like this, webinars like this can be a way to equip us with the necessary skills in order to translate this in our particular institutions or schools. Okay. So the need to develop values education is constitutionally based. So the supreme law of the land speaks of that. The second guiding principle would be the Department Order number 41, DepEd Order number 41 series of 2003, where it states that values education teachers should be utilized fully. That's the keyword. Values ed teachers should be utilized fully to help other area teachers integrate values development in the subject area they teach. So you will facilitate the transmission of values ed to your fellow teachers. I mentioned also last week the problem with this kind of webinars is that only values ed teachers are asked to attend. And yet, we consider everyone the role of every teacher as values education teacher. You are already, I don't consider you experts in values, but at least the content of values education you are fully aware. But how about the teachers teaching other subjects? So they should also be the ones attending this kind of webinar because every teacher is a values education teacher. So that's the second. So we have the supreme law of the land, we have the DepEd order. Of course, you now have the GMRC law. Okay? I hope I'm correct with this. Sir Floyd, tama ba yung RA 114761? So that's the GMRC law, institutionalizing GMRC again in our schools. So that's another reason. So webinars like this have to be attended simply because of these reasons. That's the third one. Of course, the last one would be the K12 curriculum. Okay. So the K12 curriculum can be considered as value laden, full of values. But of course, I'll give just concrete examples where we can find particularly subjects that we incorporate these values. Of course, the grades 1 to 10, you have the edukasyon sa pagpapakatao. Okay? And you know that one of the course learning outcomes would be malinang ang mga potential, to harness one's potential. Again, very important later on to take into account these concepts. But I think this is one subject where we can really say that the Philippine educational system is really also taking into account values education apart from the GMRC law. Okay, we have the K12 curriculum. In the senior high school, you have the personal development. Okay, so I quote this as one of the learning competencies. For example, discuss the relationship among physiological, cognitive, psychological, spiritual, etc. So meaning to say, here you can already see Okay, the interaction of all the different aspects or dimensions that govern a human being. So that the human being's dimension is taken into account, not just his intellectual dimension. Now, so these are motivations, very important motivations why we are here, training and attending this series of webinar. So maybe not only because of the certificate, not only because of the points that we are going to receive, but we really have to equip ourselves every now and then with the necessary tools to further deepen our role as values educators. Now, while we have these fundamental motivations, these beautiful guiding motivations, if you try to look at our Philippine educational system, so that's personal development, meaning the K-12 curriculum. But if you try to take a look at our educational system at the present, it's largely governed by technocratic paradigm. Okay, so meaning to say that schools are training their students to be future professionals and maybe future employees of corporations, companies that are business oriented. So schools become subserviently producing graduates with the ideology of a consumer oriented market. Education has become largely technical. Yun po yung nagiging problema. Even our K-12 curriculum, di ba? The one of the guiding motivations is that after you graduate in senior high school, then you are already ready to have a job. You can already work. That's the paradigm of our educational system. So, nakakaligtan na po dito yung tinatawag nating holistic education. Okay, so this is the first presupposition I think that we really have to take into account. Holistic education. Holistic education is also termed by others as whole person education. And I think this is one of the goals of every school, of every educational institution, meaning educating the person, educating the student in all the dimensions of his being human. And when we speak of the dimensions, there are many dimensions: intellectual, emotional, psychological, physical, economic, political, etc. So, of course, our topic, psycho-spiritual. So, yes, it's the goal of every educational institution. Unfortunately, one of the most neglected dimension is the core dimension, that is the spiritual dimension. I believe that personally, I believe this is one of the most neglected dimensions. We focus so much on training the mind, but not so much the heart, the core dimension of human existence. And yet we see it as a very important, integral component of the curriculum. I use the word essential because I'm teaching philosophy. When I use the word essential, the root word is essence. And in philosophy, how do you define essence? That which makes a thing what it is. Meaning, education will not be there without taking into account the psycho-spiritual component or dimension. Okay? Well, by the way, the word psycho-spiritual is used just to see also the dynamism of this of spirituality and psychology, because we cannot talk, as I've said, of spiritual wellness also without integrating psychological wellness. So most of the scholars nowadays use the word psycho-spiritual, but nonetheless, we shall continue. Okay, so here, education, psycho-spiritual component is really very important. And what do we mean by psycho-spiritual component of education? What should we focus into? If we speak, my dear teachers, of psycho-spiritual component of education, it really puts emphasis in the continuing quest for a richly textured interior life. Ito po yung tinatawag nating kaloob-looban, interior life. That is really the emphasis of psychospiritual. Okay? Do we ask our students to reflect, to talk about the meaning of things? Okay? To have that kind of self-introspection, or maybe not just our students, even us. Do we reflect? Do we contemplate? Because questions are not simply academic. For example, what is the meaning of life cannot be answered by empirical sciences. You cannot go in the laboratory and then experiment whether or not there are things that make life meaningful. You have to discover it yourself. So psychospiritual development and wellness will really put emphasis in this. The continuing quest. That's the key word or phrase, continuing quest. It's a process. Okay, it's dynamic. So self-discovery is dynamic. Now, we should teach our students to converse, not just to converse with us, not just to converse with themselves, with their classmates, but to converse with themselves. Because according to Lorillard, one academic expert, learning is a conversation. But nowadays, rarely do we see students also conversing with one another. They would rather spend their time alone listening to music or watching or playing in their cell phones, etc. So how can they really learn the art of conversation? How can they speak with themselves? And if they can't speak with themselves, how can they be healthy speaking with others? So you have the idea now that without healthy intrapersonal relationship, you cannot have that healthy interpersonal relationship. But first and foremost, conversation is very important component of education. But conversation should also be from within. Okay? And one important aspect of conversation, in any conversation, is the art of listening. So students must be taught to listen with themselves, to converse with themselves, to contemplate, to reflect on the meaning of things, of lessons taught to them. Do not just ask them to memorize data, or teachers should not ask them to memorize data, but rather, what is the meaning of being taught to them? How does it touch them personally? That's very important. So without this art of conversation, we will not be able to focus also in what we call the psycho-spiritual component of education. And in any art of conversation, the art of listening is very important. Okay? So kapag pinag-uusapan dito ang conversation, kailangang makinig ka. Nakikinig ba tayo sa ating mga sarili? Kung ano sinasabi ng ating sarili. That's very important. Okay? I was browsing the internet for my ethics and philosophy class at Miriam, and then I was able to visit this empoweringwomen.com. And maybe it's providential that I was led to reading this. Listen to your emotions. And I think it's very important to share also this to you. That listening to ourselves is what we call implying listening to our emotions. There are so many emotions that we feel. For example, bitterness, resentment, discomfort, etc. But what does these emotions tell us? For example, bitterness, pait, or resentment, hinanakit. Marami po tayo dito. Okay? So, kung may pait sa buhay, it simply shows you where you need to heal. Okay? So, where you're still holding judgment on others and yourself. Kung may hinanakit tayo, it simply shows that we're living in the past and not allowing the present to be as it is. So, they are not at all negative. They can be what we call room for growth. They can be opportunities for improvement. So if we are, for example, feeling discomfort, it is simply because, what do you call this? There are some things that maybe we want to change, but unable to achieve it. So it simply shows you that you need to pay attention right now to what is happening because you're being given the opportunity to change, to do something different. For example, if you feel discomfort in this new setup, for example, I also feel discomfort. I am not comfortable with having this kind of talk in just what we call in a virtual way, in a virtual setup, facing my laptop. I'm not comfortable. But it shows that I need also to change the way I do things. So to do something different than how I typically do it. So that's basically what it means. When we listen to our emotions, let's listen to it in the positive way. Kung nagagalit tayo, if there's anger, it shows you what you are passionate about. If you are angry with the students unable, for example, to perform because you are passionate with excellence. Okay, it shows you what you are passionate about, where your boundaries are. Okay, so again, anger is not at all negative, but it can be negative if, of course, at the end you are able to hurt someone or harm someone. So these are just some emotions. Other emotions would be disappointment. Okay, naulit yung resentment. Okay, you have disappointment. So is that you tried for something. For example, if you end up frustrated with doing something, then you should not be negative about this. It shows that you tried for something, that you did not give in to apathy. Apathy means that, what is apathy? Apathy comes after tatluthi and before limati. Joke. Sorry po. Napaka-corny naman yun. Okay, apathy or indifference. Okay? So disappointment is there simply because it shows that you still care. If you are disappointed, it shows that you care. So you're ending up frustrated because you care for something. And other emotions, guilt and sadness. I would not dwell on this, but I think what is important really is if we learn the art of conversation, if we talk about intrapersonal relationship, one aspect is to converse with yourself, and of course, to listen to your emotions. Okay? I think another important concept of psychospiritual development or wellness is the concept that leads us to a greater sense of knowing who we are. Okay? Greater sense of self-concept or self-awareness. At this point, I'd like to maybe ask some participants to answer the question. What makes this question difficult? Okay? Para makapagpahinga muna naman ako sa kakadaldal. All right. Sino ako? Or who am I? What makes this question difficult? So fundamental to understanding ourselves, fundamental or basic to self-concept or self-awareness is the question, who am I? Or in Tagalog, sino ako? But what makes this question difficult? Anyone? Anyone inspired by the Holy Spirit? Meron po ba? Bakit po napakahirap sagutin yung tanong na sino ako? So, a sense of self-concept or self-awareness must begin with the question, who am I? But what makes this question difficult? Anyone who would like to share? If there's anyone also who would like to share their thoughts by using the chat box, maybe I can ask Sir Floyd to read it for me.
Ito po sir yung sa bakit daw po mahirap. We don't want to accept who we are.
Yes.
sense of
Uh,
purpose.
so if you don't want to accept who we are, of course, you won't be having a healthy relationship with yourself. Okay. So later on, I'll discuss this. But anyone else who would like to share his or her thought? Why is this question, who am I, difficult?
Maybe we don't know totally ourselves.
All right. Yeah, we can we cannot be able to really know who we are because knowing ourselves is also a process. But at least we must be able to converse with ourselves in order to know who we are. Because we can never determine who we are, our strength, our capabilities, our weaknesses without conversing with ourselves. Hence the term now intrapersonal, from within. Okay? But basic is the question, who am I? Sino ako? Meron pa ba, Sir Floyd?
Sabi niya dito, who am I is difficult because there is no self-acceptance.
Okay.
Too much
All right.
reservation.
In psychology, so if there's no self-acceptance, it is simply because you don't have a great sense of self-concept. So you cannot accept yourself simply because you don't have that sense of self-concept or self-awareness. You want to be somebody else, but you are not this person. Okay? So we imitate someone, even our hairstyle, even the way we dress, we imitate others. Okay? Even the manner we teach, we try to imitate others, neglecting our own uniqueness, our distinctiveness. So if that is always the case, then you don't have a healthy relationship with yourself. Okay? Yes, it's difficult to know who we are. It's difficult to accept our weaknesses sometimes. But a person who has a healthy relationship with himself or herself will always be able to accept who he is or who she is. Okay? So you don't have to look beautiful to others, for example, because you are confident you are beautiful. So whatever other people thinks of you, maybe they are not important because you are convinced you are this person. But of course, it should not be also, what do you call this? In the sense that you no longer take into account the critique of others. All right. So personally, what makes this question difficult? What makes this question seemingly very difficult to answer? Because first, we are the questioner. Tayo yung nagtatanong. Tayo yung nagtatanong, pero ang problema, tayo rin dapat yung sumagot. Di po ba? So we are at once the questioner, we are the ones questioning, but the ones being questioned. And because we are the ones being questioned and we are the ones asking the question, hence the difficulty. Sino nga ba ako? But what I'm driving at here, my dear teachers, is this, that psychospiritual development does not only take into account interior life, but psychospiritual development must lead to a greater sense of self-concept or self-awareness. Know yourself. Again, I'm also in the field of philosophy, and one of the popular philosophers who really emphasized the need to understand yourself, to know yourself, was Socrates. Okay? So for Socrates, you have to know yourself because for him, the unexamined life is not worth living. Okay? So the unexamined life is not worth living. Remember, Socrates lived centuries ago, but these words still echo at the present. Some people are unable to examine their life, and so they end up maybe unable also to have a clear direction in life. So, the importance of knowing who we are. We cannot be having a healthy relationship without a healthy relationship with ourselves. Okay, and when we talk about self-development, my dear teachers, okay, it is important again to take into account the significance of self-introspection. What mean by self-introspection? Just the other term for reflection. Meaning thinking from within, asking the question, who am I? Or maybe the question, bakit nga ba ako nagtuturo? Bakit ako nandito sa profesyon na to? So more often than not, we really have to have that question with ourselves. Okay? The foundation of self-development and anything about the self, self-control, self-care, self-esteem, self-empowerment, the foundation is simply self-knowledge or self-awareness. Without self-knowledge, without self-awareness, hindi po magkakaroon ng self-development, self-control, self-care. Okay? So, we must learn to be able to know who we are because they are important foundations of everything about ourselves. Okay? So, we cannot overemphasize. It's really important. The truth of intrapersonal should really be a greater awareness of who we are. We cannot have a better relationship with others. We cannot successfully relate with others, interpersonal, if we are unable to relate first with ourselves. Okay? Now, here comes the importance, of course, okay, of what we call spirituality. But let me stress this again. In order to successfully relate with others, one must first learn to relate with himself or with herself. So that's very important, intrapersonal. Now, I mentioned earlier the need to recognize the psycho-spiritual aspects of intrapersonal goal in life. Ito yung mga taong who stand firm in their principles. Hindi nabibili yung kanilang mga prinsipyo. I think that is also a product of spirituality. Okay? Na yung mga teacher na iba na pag niregaluhan ng estudyante, dagdag points. Hindi. Kung ang prinsipyo mo ay firm, you will not be, of course, shaped by something else because you are shaped by your principles, by your values, and above all, by your spirituality. Okay. So spirituality is something that encourages us to formulate a vision, nurture a passion, and forge a commitment. I think the example I gave here would be people who end up unemployed during the pandemic. Ang dami po. Very, what do you call this? Ano yung term na ginamit ng DOLE? Basta, magkaiba kasi yung data ng DOLE at saka yung pag-aaral ng mga ibang ahensya. But more or less, 4 million people became unemployed during this pandemic. But others did not lose hope. Okay, they nurtured a sense of passion and commitment. And of course, they found ways to earn. Okay? I think that's something spiritual. Hindi sila ibinagsak ng krisis, ng pandemya, kundi umangat sila. Okay? So, that's something spiritual. Definition 5, yung spirituality is not a doctrine but rather the vital energy that creates meaning in our lives. Di po ba we have the sense of spiritu, spirit, as the root word for spirituality? Ano bang spirito bumubuhay sa iyo? Di ba yung ibang tao, spirito ng alak, yung iba spirito ng droga, buhay na buhay sila. Yung iba kahit makasigarilyo lang, buhay na. So ito yung nagpapabuhay sa kanila. But how about the others? What gives them that vital energy? Parang yung tanong nga ulit sa Nescafe, para kanino tayo bumabangon? So yun nga yung tanong ko kanina, mga kaibigan. What makes teaching meaningful for us? If you wake up in the morning happy and smiling because you're going to face your students, that's something spiritual. Pero yung mabigat ang pagbangon mo kasi papasok ka na naman at makikita mo na naman yung masungit mong estudyante. Delikado yan. Kasi yung motivation mo hindi na kaagad healthy. And remember, some of the things that start at home will be also brought in our classrooms. Kapag nagagalit ka sa bahay, minsan hindi mo na naiwasan, nagagalit ka na rin sa mga estudyante mo. More often than not, it happens. Okay? So para kanino tayo bumabangon? So if you wake up in the morning smiling, and then you know that you're going to face your students, if you are happy about that, that's also something spiritual. Okay, the last one, of course, we cannot do away with this, is that spirituality is the conscious engagement with the presence of God. Again, yung personal relationship with God is something really, really very important. Kanino humuhugot ng lakas ang mga tao ngayon? Kahit ang sensya, even science cannot help us with these vaccines, for example, ang tagal pa daw. Okay, so people cling in to their faith, to their personal relationship with God. Okay, I know of some families whose relatives, close relatives, died because of COVID, but they did not lose hope. Okay, they did not lose their faith in God. Rather, it strengthened their faith in God. So that's spirituality. Okay. All right. Let's move on. So, just to summarize some of my thoughts before I continue. So, intrapersonal, again, knowing who we are, conversing with ourselves. Okay, they are important elements before we talk about healthy interpersonal relationship. And for me, if you have that healthy intrapersonal relationship and interpersonal relationship, it will also move to what we call healthy transpersonal relationship. a relationship with someone greater. Maybe some people would call this God or a transcendent being. Okay. So this reflects in our relationship. Okay. The spiritual dimension will be there. Okay. So you have the personal dimension, intrapersonal, interpersonal meaning the social dimension, but you also have now the transpersonal, the psycho-spiritual dimension. Relation. Inspection, and later on, teaching our students to have that sense of self-introspection. Remember always, it may sound cliche, but you cannot give what you do not have. So, if you cannot have that healthy relationship with yourself, do not teach your students to have a healthy relationship with themselves. Remember nowadays, we're talking about psychological wellness, spiritual wellness. Ang babata po na nagsisuicide. Di ba? At sasabihin ng iba, nagpakamatay dahil lang sa love life. Hindi po maliit na bagay yung love life. Because it's something that some people are passionate about. Yung iba nagpakamatay dahil sa grades. Hindi po maliit na bagay yung grades. Because some people are very passionate about education, excellence. So, I think these are things that we really have to consider nowadays when we talk about the dynamics of intrapersonal and interpersonal, psychological wellness, spiritual wellness. They are very important because they are not given attention nowadays in our present educational system. Dahil busy ang mga educational systems, naturuan yung mga bata ano ang gagawin pag nagtrabaho na sila. And this is also one of the reasons why I think general education in college is not given primary importance. Naikwento ko rin noong nakaraan, I overheard some students of mine in one school where I taught na yung GE subject daw niya, ang daming assignment, parang major daw. Because I know the student, I approached him and asked, ano ba ang mas mataas, major o general? Sabi niya, general. General sir, hindi naman general. General sir. So sabi ko, yun lang pala eh. So ibig sabihin, dapat bigyan mo rin ng respeto yung general education. Hindi lang yung major subjects. But I think what is important in having general education subject is that it is something that contributes to what we call holistic education. Without GE, if we only talk about technical courses, then surely holistic education will not be there. We will totally neglect the psycho-spiritual dimension. Okay, so let me continue. Continue na lang po, konting tiis na lang sa pakikinig sa akin. I'll be talking about the paradox of our age. Hindi ko alam, Sir Floyd, kung gagana yung sounds, pero ito lang yung pinili ko na mas maigsi. Maybe some of you or most of you are already familiar with this paradox of our age. But this is just to show you, again, the importance, the significance of what we call taking into account the psycho-spiritual dimension of our lives. Let's have this.
Ano sir, pag nag-share po kayo, pakipindot po yung share music doon sa baba.
Where Sir Floyd?
I-ano nyo muna po, stop nyo muna po yung share sir.
Yes, and then?
And then ano po, pag nag-share po kayo, pakipindot po yung may music doon sa baba, yung share music. Pakipindot po yung share sir.
Dito sa baba, sa
Opo, yung may dalang parang ano dyan, ano lang po yung tuldok. Para ma-share po yung music niya. Stop sharing nyo muna sir.
Stop sharing. And then?
Tapos, share nyo po uli. Tapos, meron po yung sa ilalim dyan. Yung pag nag-share po kayo, yung share music sa baba.
Share music sa baba. Sa screen ko,
Apo, sir. Pag clinic nyo po yung share, dun sa pinakababa po. Meron
share
po dun.
computer sound. Okay.
Apa, tsaka yung isa rin po. Ayan
Okay.
po. Tapos share na po.
Yes. Sige. Tingnan natin ha. Alright.
Ayan po.
The paradox of our age.
Ayan, sir, meron.
We have bigger houses but smaller families, more conveniences but less time. We have more degrees but less sense, more knowledge but less judgment, more experts but more problems, more medicines but less healthiness. We've been all the way to the moon and back, but have trouble crossing the street to meet the new neighbor. We built more computers to hold more information to produce more copies than ever, but have less communication. We have become long on quantity, but short on quality. These are times of fast foods, but slow digestion, tall man, but short character, steep profits, but shallow relationships. It's a time when there is much in the window, but nothing in the
Ulitin
room.
ko po ha. Medyo baka hindi lang na ano. Pero kailangan tignan natin ulit and then pag-isipan natin yung mga sinasabi dito sa paradox of our age.
The paradox of our age. We have bigger houses but smaller families, more conveniences but less time. We have more degrees but less sense, more knowledge but less judgment, more experts but more problems, more medicines but less healthiness. We've been all the way to the moon and back, but have trouble crossing the street to meet the new neighbor. We built more computers to hold more information to produce more copies than ever, but have less communication. We have become long on quantity, but short on quality. These are times of fast foods, but slow digestion, tall man, but short character, steep profits, but shallow relationships. It's a time when there is much in the window, but
Okay,
nothing in the
so
room.
let me stop at this point and maybe us participants, some participants to share their thoughts about this paradox of our age. Maybe a short reflection after hearing or reading some of the texts or all of the texts. So what part made an impact on you? Or personally, how are you affected with this? So let's just assume that we are in a recollection, Joe. Sige. Ito yung mahirap pag virtual.
Apo.
So paano po kayo naapektuhan dito? So how are you affected? Personally, what is the meaning of this paradox of our age for you? So anyone?
Ayun, sabi po nung isang participant, nobody's perfect. No po.
Nobody is perfect. O, tama naman po yan. Because only God, they say, is perfect. Because if we are already perfect, then we are already God. Okay? So our perfection is not the same as God's perfection. But what does this paradox of our age telling us? What strikes you most, for example?
No more time for serving God.
No more time for serving God. Yeah, teachers are busy doing many things. So they have no more time to serve God. Ano pa po? We have more degrees but less sense, more knowledge but less judgment, more experts but more problems, more medicines but less healthiness, etc.
Spend more quality time with your family than material things such as your job and business.
Okay, spend more quality time.
Part in the paradox says that a tall man but short in character It helps us to realize that people of the world are becoming more engaging in earthly possessions,
Mm.
reminding us that the basic and simple things are overlooked. Somewhat ironic, we are improving to achieve something, but the result doesn't meet what we really need to have. Time changes, but we should be watchful if we should go with the flow. It's the
Okay.
balance of life.
All right. Thank you po sa mga sharings nyo. I remember, I think I will use John Paul II's words. Kasi siyempre, nasa linya din ako ng theology or spirituality. Ang sabi niya, people nowadays focus their attention on having rather than being. Okay? To have is the focus, not to be. Okay? So that's the problem. Yun nga yung sinasabi niyo, people are more focused on material things, consumerism, material-oriented society, simply because nowadays, people focus their attention in having rather than being. I always ask this question, whether in school or in a context of retreat and recollection, will it make you less of a human if you don't have a laptop? Will it make you less of a human if your cell phone is still maybe the 3210, the 3310, or the analog type? Will it make you less of a human? Okay? So society's standards nowadays, they will tell you, oh, hindi ka in, ano ba doon, Jurassic ka. That's already what we call the standard we set. And so because of this standard set by the society that we also set with ourselves, I think what struck me most in this paradox of our age would be our inner room is empty. Yung sinabi sa last line, it's a time where there is much in the window but nothing in the room. Diba pag nag-window shopping tayo, dami makikita. Wala kang alam pambili kung gusto mong bumili ng mga nakikita mo sa mall. Yes, there is much in the window but nothing in the room. And I think the room being referred to there or here is our inner room. Because if our inner room is empty, we cannot be able to see the beauty and meaning of things around us. We see the beauty and meaning of things simply because our inner room is full. Diba? So, what makes a rose important, for example? What makes a rose important is the time you spend with the rose. So what makes someone something important is the time you spend with it. You cannot appreciate the beauty of an art, for example, if you will not take time to really take a look at it. Pero yung iba, ngayon, iba ang iksi na ng pasensya. Wala, kulang sa inner room development, kulang sa intrapersonal. Okay, so let's reflect further now on our role as teachers. Are we having that role to maybe develop among our students a mind that is full of data, full of knowledge, or are we to train our students to be mindful, to be attentive, not just with the things around them, but with themselves, with what is happening to them? And if you are, of course, training the students to have this knowledge that they are to acquire in your particular subject, this is also very important that we teach them to be mindful. Okay, to converse, as I've said, with themselves, to pay attention to what is happening to them. We also have to pay attention to what is happening to our students. A smile to a student can mean a lot because that student may be suffering from something. I have been teaching for more than 20 years, but I never use the word stupid or bobo because that's totally downgrading. Pag nabigkas mo yung salitang bobo or stupid sa estudyante, that's downgrading. That's the humanizing term. Because no one is bobo. No one is stupid. And yet I know of some teachers mentioning that word. They are not mindful to what is happening to their students. And so how can we teach our students to be mindful also, to contemplate, to reflect? So I think what I'm giving here are just some reorientation again and a reminder of our role as teachers. So I saw this beautiful quotation, and I think it is always a reminder for us. Remember that a teacher takes a hand, opens a mind, but above all, touches a heart. If we will not be able to touch the heart of our students, my dear teachers, we will not be able to help them have that sense of self-respect, self-awareness, self-concept, or self-knowledge. Okay? All right. From James Knight, I borrowed this from James Knight, former Ohio State faculty. How can we motivate students to have this maybe healthy relationship, not just in the actual classroom, but also now maybe in the virtual classroom, in the online learning. So it is very important. I will not go through this deeply. I know the meaning of. I know you know the meaning of these things. So once again, make students feel important. Okay, every student in your class should feel important. That's why favoritism have no room in a classroom setting, because every student should be feeling that they are important. Make students feel invited, particularly those who are ostracized, particularly those who feel they don't belong because they don't have this or that. Okay, so make students feel invited. Deal with needed changes from positive viewpoint. This is a big change now from the face-to-face encounter to the virtual encounter, from the actual classroom situation to a virtual classroom or online learning. But we have to deal with these changes. The new normal, they say nowadays. Learn to make nonverbal clues. I think the power of these nonverbal clues, smile, for example, a tap on the shoulder, etc. Okay, so even the word thank you can mean a lot. Of course, that's verbal, but all these things, they can mean a lot to a student. Get to know your students personally, and above all, of course, learn to empathize. Establish parameters. I think what is important here is this. You can be friendly to your students, because if you are friendly to your students, they can be more open to sharing their problems or concerns to you. But establish parameters that they should still remember that you are a teacher, you are their teachers. So establish parameters. Okay. Use student-centered instruction. You know that already. Then be enthusiastic again. So I think I've been teaching for, as I've said, more than 20 years, not for bragging, but I always end up in our students' evaluation in the college, part of the top 10 among faculty members in terms of the student evaluation. And I don't know, because one of the things that my students cannot forget is my sense of humor. Okay, so be enthusiastic, have that sense of humor, be alive, be active, be proactive in engaging students in the classroom. Very important. Pero yung parang ang bigat-bigat ng paa mo pumasok sa classroom, nako, mararamdaman po yan ng mga bata. Even of course, ng mga kasama mo, mga co-teachers mo. And of course, personalizing the class. Meaning to say that maybe you can treat your students as your sons and daughters, and so you can have more that personal sense of touch to your class. These are just but some, what do you call this, suggestions for a good classroom environment, online or actual classroom. Okay? Sige. Baka mamaya na yung mga tanong. Anyway, let me continue. So, quoting again on John Paul II, our role as teachers, as witnesses, is very important. We must practice what we preach, particularly if you are values education teachers. Even your co-teachers look up to you. So people of today listen more willingly to witnesses than to teachers. Okay? If they do listen to teachers, it is because they are witnesses. Are we witnesses? That's the question. Do we practice what we preach? So our psycho-spiritual dimension must be healthy in a sense that if we are teachers, we should do the same thing to our students. And we should act as witnesses. So thank you very much, my dear teachers, for listening and maybe for not listening, joke. So if there are questions, I shall stop sharing and then entertain some questions or maybe reflections, not just questions. So marami pong salamat sa pakikinig.
Ayan, maraming salamat din po, Sir Ato, sa oras po na binahagi mo po sa amin. Mula po sa mga guro, mula dito sa DepEd Region 3 at sa DepEd Tapat po. Kasama po natin sila ngayon mga taga-NCR po. Hindi lang po ito Region 3, meron din po mga taga-Taguig and Pateros.
Okay po, sige po. Welcome po.
Ilang Quezon City din po. Okay po. Kung may mga tanong po tayo kay Sir,